So this is going to be one of the more interesting talks, I think, given the fact that the title is How to Green Your Historic Preservation Project, which may be why there are very few people here, because it's sort of like how to eat more vegetables and have less fun or something. I don't know. We'll see. So actually, this is actually a serious thing, because what I'm going to show you is not a thing about LEED. It's not a thing about tax credits. And it's not a how-to. So maybe it's just either a weird title or a bad presentation. We'll see going forward whether we can fix that. So basically, there's sort of an existential situation with environmental design and historic preservation. Historic preservation, among the things that are important in historic preservation are obviously protecting history, protecting culture. It's rooted in conservation of basically our resources, things we build in our culture, those sorts of things. Environmental design tends to make what's most important: health of habitat, health of humans, health of habitat, health of plants and animals, and innovation seems to be one of the things that's a driver in environmental design. So, you know, sometimes these things are thought of as sort of two ships passing in the night, or two brothers hitting each other over the head constantly, or the House of Representatives and the Senate and the President kind of thing. So I'm going to try to start to deal with this tension. So on the environmental side, you have all these rating systems here. And they all are trying to get to the same place, which is to evaluate buildings in order to try to make them more green, more responsible to the environment, however you want to say it. They all have slightly different sort of things they're looking for, and they have slightly different grading systems in order to get there, and slightly different processes. In the end, most of these are consensus-based, which means that they actually change over time. LEED has changed many times since it started. And so what we want to do as an office is try to figure out how to navigate this sort of thing. Some projects want to go down this path, and others want to do the right thing and not go down the path. In the end, the big idea is to do the right thing is more important than any one of these, checking off any one of these checklists. Now, on the historic preservation side, or rehabilitation, restoring, reconstructing, those sorts of things, you follow the Secretary of Interior standards. And what you find also is that basically the preservation things for interior, for the Secretary of Interior, and in renovations for health, safety, and welfare are really not like this. There's no methodology to get from one to the other. And the quote in here is actually sort of enunciating that you know, you have to wade through this yourself. This is a really boring slide, but it's just to remind me of what to talk about here. One of the things about LEED, which is probably the most important environmental measurement for buildings at this point, is that ASHRAE, which is the Association of American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, Air Conditioning Engineers, which just sounds like a lot of fun if you go to one of their things. But I don't know if there's anybody here that does that. But in any case, they set performance standards for buildings. So one of the fundamental things that happens is that in order to become a LEED certified building, you have to meet the ASHRAE standards that are also in the building code. What happens in the building code, though, is if it's an old building, things are different than if it's a new. But if it's a LEED accredited project, you have to hit these ASHRAE standards, which brings into question the lighting, the mechanical systems, and probably the scariest thing for old buildings is the building envelope. The windows, the doors, and most importantly, the wall sections. All right, so now we're going to try to escape these two things that are banging together and try to figure out a different way to do it, and it's sort of more in tune to how we do things in our office. If we go back and look at environmental design and historic preservation and look at the root of both of these movements or both of these interests or both of these filters to look at things through is conservation, whether it's conservation of land, of resources, or conservation of cultural resources in the case of historic things. So the other thing to think about is that historic preservation, you know, has this, in America, really starts to happen in the 60s, about after everybody gets sick of bulldozing all these buildings in order to put up uglier buildings than the ones we just bulldozed. So one way that these two things start to work together is you can actually start to use sustainability as a justification for preserving, retrofitting old buildings. Because building a new building and putting bamboo and cork and all these things in it actually uses more resources than keeping a building and working with it. So basically preservation and conservation can work together pretty well. So if we start from that place instead of from the lead rules or the Secretary of Interior's rules and just sort of get in one of those sort of, we have to go through those sort of bonking head things all the time, but we're going to be bigger than that. So if we start to think about preservation and reuse in sort of a more positive or proactive way, and start to use words like save, restore, adaptive reuse, which is sort of dull, but retrofit, transform, make relevant, make viable, interesting, beautiful, functional. What happens is that buildings that people love, they don't tend to tear them down. You know, whether it's the Hanley Library, I mean, it was functionally obsolete for a long time until it was renovated. Hanley High School, which our office worked on, is a pretty weird high school in new ideas about security and safety and about proportions of hallways, the classrooms, and all those sorts of things. But what happens is that even if things become functionally obsolete, if people love those buildings, they have more of a reason to keep them around and maybe work on them. So what we do as an office is try to make things that people love, or take things that are around and make people love them. I'll show you some examples in a minute. So really, the sort of big idea that we work with, which is also not, it's sort of self-evident and maybe slightly dumb, is that basically our projects become a series of judgments about what to keep, what to remove, and what to add. And that works for both preservation and it works for environmental things. And whenever you work on a project with an existing building, you can intellectualize it all you want, but it really comes down to what you keep, what you take out, what you add, kind of thing. That's it. So now I'm going to show you, because I'm an architect, and architects always communicate by showing pictures of projects and talk about them. We can't help it. This is the project we did for the courthouse downtown. And for anybody that hasn't been in it, when there was a selective demolition done, there was actually a curse to Jefferson Davis scratched into the wall. There was all this graffiti that actually plays into what we ended up doing. Okay, so here's the building as it sits today. One of the things about this building is that if you go back to the ASHRAE story, is that the building envelope. So we couldn't really touch the windows because they were gloriously large, and except for I'm showing you an elevation that doesn't have any windows on it. But believe me, there are nice big windows in it. We couldn't actually do anything to the outside of the building because it looks the way it does. So we had to see what we could do inside. So this is the courthouse, the courtroom, I mean, in the courthouse. And so what happens here is that, and for those of you that don't know this, this courtroom is actually set up for a judicial system that no longer exists in the United States. This had gentlemen justices that set up there. There was no jury. So this is one of the few in the state. There are almost none left that actually exist still, that show this old way of doing trials. So what we did in here, and it's a little hard to see, is that we kept the windows on the outside, fixed them up, and then the other thing that we did is we put storm panels on the inside. So they're very large. These windows here are 10 feet high probably. So we made large storm panels that fit in there so that the outside doesn't change, and we improved the mechanical systems. Some of the other things that we did in places where we could make it work is we actually put stud walls on the inside of the building. Now, normally you don't do that sort of thing. In our case, because there were so many Civil War soldiers that went through the building, oh, that's better. Let's go back. There were so many Civil War soldiers that went through the building, they literally scraped their names into the walls. So, in some cases, and you can kind of see it in this, is there a pointer on this or not? But in the back corner there, you see a little black area there. That's actually graffiti on the wall, scratched into the walls back there. So we actually presented this graffiti. Other things were just too vague or too much to deal with. So we actually put stud walls up with insulation so that if anybody ever wants to go in and do essentially an archaeological project on it, it's there and it's protected. So we had to put some doors on the front that met the Americans with Disabilities Act, because that's another problem with retrofitting historic buildings, is they have to meet current notions about what buildings should do, that they should serve everybody and you can't leave disabled people in their houses and things like that. What we try to do in our work is actually also sort of bring a sense of wonder to things. This is all the woodwork that went in the cupola of the courthouse, and you could never see it because there was a ceiling in. There were actually 3 ceilings in this upper story of this building. So we actually put a glass floor in. You can call it a glass ceiling, but you can stand on it, so it is cooler to call it a glass floor there. So actually you have to stand on the glass floor, which is about 18 feet up in the air, to go up that really tall ladder to get up to the top. What we also did is we actually had to condition the attic and the cupola, and we put windows in. You can see the windows up there in the top, because it was originally built with vents, like louvered vents. So whenever the wind blew rain, it would just blow in and rot the timbers. So we had to repair all the timbers as well because they were rotting. And the engineers thought it was so bad when they went up in it. They said, no one go in here except for the guys that do it. And so they actually had to work on it from a cherry picker thing on the outside for a while because it was so unsafe. Yeah, and this is kind of describes, this is what it looked like before we started with it. And if you want to know, those are new clock faces in it. And the old clock face is actually in Rouse City Hall. So there was as the city and county does, if they get into sort of complaints every once in a while, we found out through the records that when the city hall was built, it was taller, so some people that mattered, I guess, at the time, thought it was better to put the clocks in the new building, and they didn't want to buy new clocks. So since from whenever, it was the early 1900s that Rouse City Hall was built, you just had big pie tents covering that up. So we made it black because the other one was white, so it was sort of what spy versus spy sort of thing going on. And you can see in the right-hand picture there's actually windows in the attic instead of louvers, which are in the left. This is the interior. When you do take an old building and you have to bring it up to speed, you get new lighting, new mechanical systems and the like, and it's very difficult to try to stick that in. This is the building that our office operates out of now. So this is what it looked like in the 1940s. And the lower picture is a photograph from Hamley Archives of the guys that worked in it. So when we purchased the building, it looked like the bottom right-hand slide. So it was basically an old building from the 1880s, early 1890s, that was sort of uncared for. It was sort of decrepit. Inside it had drop ceilings, and you can see from the top left picture. It was being used as a church, and so it had all these paintings on the wall, and then this lower left slide is a very dramatic photograph of just a room with a toilet in it, with a skylight above it. So back to the thing about love or making buildings that people enjoy, what we wanted to do is sort of make this building feel better about itself. So one of the business names, we went back and researched who was in this building from the time it was built on. And it was basically a series of butcher shops and grocery stores up until World War II. So, but one of the names of the places was City Meats. So we decided to call the building the City Meat Building, painted this sort of dark bluish, blackish purple, and then put the images of the butchers in the windows, because not many people get to go in architecture offices. So we wanted to show the butchers outside, and it also knocks down the light, the southeastern light that comes into the building in the morning. So this is the inside. We looked at getting tax credits, and because this was a store and it was open, they didn't want us to put these walls in, so we said we'll just keep our quarters and do what we wanted to. So we ripped out the ceilings to show the old joists up there. There's actually, in the ceiling, there's an old sign up there that says cheese on it. They use as a wedge to keep the floor from squeaking, so it's still in there. But back to that slide that has all those words like reinvigorate, that wasn't on, I just made that up, but make viable, all those sorts of things. Our sort of take on things is that if you can make them interesting, make them something that people love, make them functional, make them viable, you make them durable. So that somebody else after we're in there will come in and go, this is great, I'm going to use this for whatever. In this case, from an environmental standpoint, the building had no insulation in it, so we added insulation, we blew in insulation, bat insulation, high efficiency mechanical systems. We actually had to put in a very high performing skylight, because the old skylight, which was wonderful, could basically roast things down there. You could dry fruit or whatever you wanted to do down below there. And again, sort of trying to preserve history. This is actually the photograph from the archives has been colorized and fills the wall inside the building. And so now what you have is you have a building that sort of winks at you at night if you drive by it. That has a sort of life to it and says, I matter again. This is a cabin at Wheatland Farms in Loudoun County, and this is one of the first buildings in that whole area of the county. So it sat here as essentially a ruin for more years than you can imagine, probably almost a century as it sitting there like that. So our client wanted to do something about it. So again, there was the idea of restoring it, but also the idea of making it so that you could use it for something. As you can see, it's 4 walls. The ceilings in it were actually 7 feet high, 7'2" high. And it was just the idea of a building. It had no wiring, it had no plumbing, it had nothing in it. This is what it ended up being. So it's the same building. We did an addition on the back. When I'm talking about what you add and what you take out, here's a perfect example. Both the builder, who is a guy that works all over the country restoring buildings, and the architect, being us, didn't want to leave the logs exposed on the outside, because we're putting a skin on the outside of the building that holds the insulation and keeps the weather out. And old log buildings really weren't, as soon as the people that built them had enough money, they would put siding on them. Our client didn't really want to listen to that. So what you have here is compromises that there's some exposed and some isn't. And what will happen is these logs will deteriorate over time to some degree, but you can always skin over top of it. I'll go into more. So this is the addition we did on the back. This is a tiny, tiny building. The whole building would easily fit inside this room with, you can maybe get 2 of these cabins in this room pretty easily. So here's the what to leave in, what to take out, and what to do about it. So on the left is the final condition. So there was the attic in this 7'2" high log building. But when you went up in this little creepy staircase to get up there, there were these beautiful skip sheathing the metal roof and the rafters, which are basically just logs that have been skinned and then pinned at the top and numbered with Roman numerals, as they were inclined to do. It was really beautiful. But if you were going to use this space, you would kill it. So we try to figure out a way to make the building show this and insulate it and heat it and cool it and wire it. So what we ended up doing is actually putting a new roof structure over top of this one, and then filling that roof structure, anything that wasn't roof, with blown in insulation, like open cell insulation, and then the new roof goes over it. So if you look at the slide on the right, the red roof there is actually a jacket over the old building. So the building grew by about 11 inches on the outside, which is really, no one would ever know, but what you end up with is this beautiful artifact on the inside, and it's a highly efficient building envelope now. This is the inside. So we were able to take out the chinking that basically, we didn't have to take it out, it basically wasn't there anyways. So there's insulation, wiring. This ended up being a cabin for a writer, and he had, this has nothing to do with the talk, but it's interesting nonetheless, is that he goes all over the world and tells businesses what to do in the future. And he was a classical music nut. So actually upstairs in that area that I showed you, I'll go back, where the drywall is up there at the ends, it actually has speakers inside the walls. So you don't know where the sound's coming from, so the building just sort of emanates classical music. So the floor to ceiling in this place is 7'2", so it brings up structural problems. What we ended up doing actually is taking the floor joists and spacing them closer together than they were, and then we hid some floor joists in places where you couldn't tell, and used some steel in certain places in order to make it, because it was a trampoline upstairs. Again, we're trying to light things so that you can appreciate the logs and so you can see.
So you said you took the chinking out?
Yeah, it was just about, it basically had fallen out.
And then you ran, and then you drilled through the...
So basically what happens then is when the chinking comes out, then what you can do is you can look at all the logs. So at one point this thing just looked like a log basket. You can look at all the logs, and the ones that were rotten were repaired, replaced. You would sort of insert sort of essentially plastics into these things to stabilize them in some cases. And then insulation was put in between the logs, and then it was redone. This is going from the old part, which is at the top of the screen, where you can see the ceiling, to the new piece, which just had a little bathroom in it. And the building was so tiny, we decided to put a glass floor in it so that you could get some light into the kitchen down below. And that's what we're looking at there. So that's the back wall of the original building. So this kitchen is the addition. And that's what it looks like from the great beyond. This is a house in Rappahannock County. This house is built in the 1700s, and we didn't know it at the time. The top left picture, the bottom two pictures were what it looked like when we came to it. The lady that lived there was very, very old. She never had indoor plumbing. She still used the outhouse until she died. So this place had, the wiring was essentially extension cords. The kitchen was a sink in a room, and she went outside to go to the bathroom. So when her clients bought it, what they had was this building that looked like a building, but it was really just a big hard tent. When we started doing some demolition inside of it, we realized that the walls were made out of timbers with brick infill. So this was built by German settlers, basically using medieval construction techniques. So that was fun going forward with. It's called Fachwerk, for those of you that want to impress your friends at cocktail parties. So one of the things about thoughtwork is that there's really no insulation, because what you have is you have brick, which is an excellent conductor of heat and cool as your insulation between the wood studs. And if the brick ever gets wet, it helps to rot the wood out. So it's sort of the perfect diabolical wall. So what we did is, in order to, no one, other than maybe some homeless folks, would consider that a place that you'd ever want to live. What we also didn't want to do is add to it in such a way that you could never understand what it was or is. So we ended up with a strategy of actually the, does this thing have a thingy on it? No. Oh yeah, look, oh, I hope I didn't kill anybody. So this is the original building, which is here. It's this piece. So what we did is we actually said, okay, we're going to do that again in different ways. So we did a piece here that we built, and then about 6 years later we did this piece. And they're all the same size, and they all have the same roof line. And what happens is we move the where you enter the house over here. So the where you park here is about 9 feet below the floor of this house. But what we do is, with a ramp inside the building, and a couple of sneaky stairs here and there, you end up basically never going up any steps that you notice to end up at this level. So what we also did is make the middle piece have one kind of windows, and the entry piece, the living piece, have another kind of windows. And you'll see they all basically are plays on squares. So here's the new entry piece, that's the living room, and you can see this sort of odd roof line, which is the same roof line as the original building has. This is the now the renovated or restored or mutilated, or however you want to take it, original piece, was showing the thoughtwork. And then we had to get a staircase into the building because there was no way to get from one floor to the other. So after much thought, it was decided to put a steel and wood modern piece inside of it. And that steel and wood piece actually spans from the front wall to the back wall. Because, I don't have a slide that shows it, but the basement is sort of really gorgeous. This beautiful stonework, and so our client wanted to make that a room as well, which meant we couldn't actually hold up the staircase. So the staircase is actually just a very weird beam that gets from the back of the house to the front of the house, spanning the entire depth of the house. So it holds itself up, so to speak. These are in the new pieces. So what we wanted to do is give them their own sense of themselves. So the kitchen piece is in the middle. It has a regular height ceiling, and then the living space has a truss work that's asymmetrical to reflect the original building. This is the room upstairs that you get to when you go up that staircase, and that's all the original everything. It's all just been cleaned, and we added a skylight to light it, and then a little window there. So all the paint is actually taken care of in place.
Where are the collar ties on this end, the tortoise? It's just...
Oh, I can go back. Let's see. So these collar ties, the floor system on the left, that photograph is taken from the top of the steps, the kind of cool one. Everything to the right actually still has the flying joists in it. It was a room that was about 8 feet deep. So if you look at this photograph on the right here, these are the collar ties that hold the building together, and then the floor system with some collar ties here hold the building together at this end.
Wow.
So, and you can see basically the idea with this house, besides not trying to overwhelm the house, it's a big house when it's all said and done, not overwhelm the house. Is the other thing we're trying to do is, this is in Rappahannock County, you can see Old Rag and all these sorts of things. So we wanted to make it so when you were in this house, you took a walk. So you could always see the sun hitting the mountains and the fields and those sorts of things. So you can live outside without ever going outside. And that's the building and the landscape. Oh, and I'm supposed to be talking about environmental stuff. I'll go back for a second. So this building has, in this building, the windows didn't really exist any longer. They would fall apart. So we had new windows in the building. We had a new insulation skin on the outside of the fockwork. And then we spray insulation in for the roofs. This has a geothermal system, so it has no basically mechanical systems that you can see. So it ends up being a super tight, highly insulated building. Actually, the middle piece that has the kitchen has these German windows in it that they're 4 foot square that you can open. We actually had the drywall delivered just through the window by opening the window. So the building is it's a super tight building that basically runs off a geothermal system. You guys yell at me if I'm not saying the right things. Those of you that work with me or those of you that are here to ruin your lunch. This is a building that you guys may be familiar with. Some of you more than others, I think. This is right downtown. It had the Echo Village sign on it for my entire life. And so the project in question is the red guy here. Mr. Chestnut, I believe, is here. And so in this project, we couldn't really touch the outside of the building. In the inside of the building, and this is the outside of the building, the Echo Village sign used to be here, advertising their low daily rates. So this is the building. It had sort of a, I think, sort of a Haitian quality to the porch on the back. Basically, those are sort of structural tile flue pieces with a slab poured on it, and so I have no idea why it stood up. So basically, we had a building here that's not classically beautiful, but it has a lot of integrity and its sort of crookedness and oddness, and we didn't feel like we wanted to change it. In the inside, the last time anybody put any money in it was, I think, when the boys came home from World War II. The wiring was on the outside of the building, and I'm not exaggerating it. The wiring was on the outside of the building. Whenever they brought electricity into the building, they brought it through the windowsill, because all the wiring was on the outside of the building. It had no mechanical systems to speak of. There was a guy that would come by the job site and go, he did it, I think he might have been losing his mind or had bad memory, because every day that I would see him, he'd go, I used to live there, it was hot as hell in the summer and you froze your ass off in the winter. He would say that multiple times. So this is what it looked like inside. And so it was basically renovated over a series of years with things like this, where the staircase went up into a ceiling. There were shower stalls in front of windows. There were, it was breathtaking, I think is a good word. Come on. Maybe I'll put my finger up there. In this case, the windows were the image of windows, but they weren't really windows. The what you see here looks like mullions or muttons. That's actually caulk in the shape of a mullion. So we talked about whether we should keep the windows or not, but it seemed insane. Okay, so what you see now with the renovation are all new windows on the outside, in the existing holes in the same configurations, with the exception of down here where there was a strange plate glass thing where people had put wood behind it to make it look like windows that were smaller. So we just did what they were trying to do. We fixed the cornice work at the top here. And then basically the environmental move, we'll talk about the architectural move. The building used to be there was a first floor that had an apartment in it, and then there was a second floor that had an apartment above it. We switched it to respect the two buildings so that this is an apartment and this is an apartment. I think there was a PowerPoint switch there. Okay, so what we did inside the building is we actually added stud walls inside the building. The trim on the inside was, again, this has been sort of landlord architecture for many years. There was very little inside that was useful. So this is a new stud wall with blown in, with spray insulation on the walls, new windows, new mechanical systems. Again, back to the sort of thing with environmental things is we try to keep as many things as humanly possible inside, and whenever we kept them, we tried to use them, let them show off. So these are the floor joists, and we actually put a new floor system with insulation in and pulled it up so you could see it. With high efficiency mechanical things in here. We reused a lot of things. We also scrounged a lot of things from in order to do things in this building. So this door is old door is stuck in here. These are new built-ins. And what we're trying to do, I should go back, is in order to put real serious mechanical systems in the building, you have to figure out where to put it because the walls are solid stone in the front and solid brick in the back. There's no attic, and there was a barber shop below with heavy timber construction. So what we did is we took and made cabinets that had sort of top pieces on them in order to hide all the modern guts. So this is that room, and that's the same staircase, but now it goes to the upper floor instead of into a ceiling. So it has less of a sort of absurdist quality to it. This is the upstairs. Has fairly low ceilings. We had to spray the ceilings in here in order to get any sort of insulation in at all with open cell insulation. This building is now very tight, and it sounds totally different than it used to. And this is a slide that shows how we decided to treat the front building as this is the stone building as a building, and the back building. So we actually added the shutters back on, painted it a different color, and let the two of them be just like an old couple that are different, like each other.
Is that tax code?
No, it wasn't. We actually we looked at pursuing it, because the building had such poor design to it, even though it was old, we opted not to go in that direction because they wanted us to keep some things that made it functionally sort of insane. It had a staircase that at its widest point was 2 feet wide. That was also a winder staircase that had plumbing running through it in the middle of the back of the building. And so when we got to a certain point, we decided that the money that to make it a tax credit project wasn't worth this sort of insanity.
I think if it had stayed, just to add to that, I would just say if you made it into one big building, it might have made sense because you could have kept that back staircase.
Yeah, it was basically a sculptural artifact.
Right, but as soon as you go to
as soon as you make it economically viable, it became a sort of an absurdist thing. So what we ended up doing is in the back that had this 2 foot wide staircase, is we, because this was built against the other building, there's took to referring to it as the Roman wall. You can see all of the strange things that have happened since this building was built in the early 1800s. So we just exposed it and lit it. In this case, we put a consciously new stair in. Remember, the stair in the front piece was the same old one we fixed up. And we didn't touch this wall, and we put glass in here so that this would be open. So now this functions as 2 separate residences. So here's the new front door to get in the back part. We also flipped the arrangement so that the main living space is upstairs and the bedrooms are on this lower level. So this is the bedrooms now, again with the this is a sort of an archaeological approach, again, because we had an old building that we didn't want to obliterate, but it was a sort of functionally insane. So we used built-ins to hide mechanical systems, we exposed floor joists, and we exposed the wall between the original building and the back piece. This actually has bamboo and cork floors in it as well. And for those of you that really like recycling, that chair is actually recycled street signs. This is the upstairs. So what we did is we flipped the building so that in this back piece, the main living space is up above. So we insulated the attic, exposed the old joists here, and pulled the floor out, and made essentially a loft living space up above. This is looking from a bedroom towards that staircase. This is up in the loft space, looking at the old Roman wall with a glass floor there, and John's bicycle. John's here so I can make fun of him. We took these, this building was ready to be moved into, so we had to take pictures before people moved into it. Well, John hadn't moved into it, so we took his stuff and put it in there, took the pictures, and then he just brought his underwear from next door in and started living there.
The books are
So he used architects as movers.
The books are still arranged by Jake. They have not changed.
So this is the living space upstairs then, with the light from above, the old joists. This is and a bear. And furniture that, I only say this because I love, that looks like it would smell like cat pee. But it didn't. Okay, and that's the last picture from George Washington's quarters. So in this case, again, the green elements of this have to do with envelope, windows, mechanical systems, reuse and everything. This project, it's funny because this project is neither LEED nor did it get tax credits. It would, the environmental things it would come in fine on all of those. We just didn't go through the bureaucratic exercise. This is the last project I'm going to show today. And this is right up, you can see this from the other project. We lead a very small practice sometimes. This is on Cork Street, and this is the house as it looked pretty much before and after. This house was essentially a tenant house that was then rethought into essentially a salon house. Its primary function is to hold art, rare books, industrial design, and hold conversations. This is what it looked like before we started. So there was actually a shower behind that accordion folding vinyl thing that must have come out of like a motorhome or something. And this is what the building looked like inside. This is what it looked like from the back with the window here, and then this is what we did with it. So again, what we're trying to do is super insulate the building, put good windows in it, and bring mechanical systems up to speed. So it's all those sort of ASHRAE things that are really boring that we're talking about. Come on. There we go. So this is, actually I'll go back. So on the left here is the room that had that accordion shower stall in it. And this is the room now. It's basically a garden library room. This is what it looks like inside. It has little to do with preservation or environmental things, but all of the shelf heights are proportioned based on the historic sizes of books. And the shelves are actually Corian that have a airplane wing edge to them. And the whole thing levitates off the wall so the air can get behind these rare books. This building is interesting in that it is old and new. This black piece back here is a new piece that we added to this piece. This is a pretty typical situation in Winchester and lots of places. They would build these solid pieces and then put porches between them. The porches that used to be on here were these old Victorian-ish porches that had last been repaired probably in World War I, and so they were literally falling down. So we opted to go with, in this case, a modern version, which is out of steel, and then it has this beautiful woodwork on it. This piece back here, we ripped down a one-story shack, and when we took the shack down, we realized that the shack was sitting on a cistern. So this black piece here is exactly the size of the walls of the cistern, and it holds a spiral staircase to get up to the second floor. And this is what we refer to in our office as mechanical lingerie. It both conceals and reveals the mechanical systems, because this is a formal garden down here, and there's no place with an alley at Cork Street and a formal garden to put in mechanical stuff.
What is the black wall made of?
It's made of cement board, hardy panel. So the intention here, and this is a hard thing to do, and is we're trying to, this is restoration. These are the same old things. And right beside it, we're trying to do something that's consciously not a restoration, so that you can read it as old and new. And what it does is it brings up things like this downspout. On this side, the gutter is blue and half round. On this side, it's a steel box gutter. And this piece here, our office made, and it's welded, and it's a staircase sort of scuppered cleavage on this side, and then it's basically a piece of sculpture that goes down between it. This piece here is on the alley, and anytime when the sun's shining from the east, you should drive down the alley or look at it. This is a rare book library that's 13 feet by 13 feet by 13 feet. It has no windows in it because it's a rare book library. This has the rarest of the rare books in. It is, the siding is wood siding, but rather than go for the window with the shutters closed that sometimes used, our client actually has, likes minimalist art, and he has a collection of it. So he has a Saul LeWitt drawing that basically looks like first-year architecture school stuff. And so we actually did a lap siding version of inspired by Saul LeWitt here, and so when the sun hits it, it becomes this pattern. This is the inside of the space now, and so it has this vaulted ceiling inside that's then packed with insulation. These walls here are all glass. They're insulated glass that's set in steel that's pulled apart in order for it to not transfer the heat. And then this is a porch that it places the Victorian porches, and it holds art now. There's actually, for those of you that have been or not been in, this is a door right here that's to the secret library. There we go. This is the apparatus that runs down the entire length of that wall. The purpose of this room is conventionally to be a living room, but it's really to hold art and antique scientific equipment and things like that. Butterflies. The mechanical system in this building is basically a small-scale version of a museum mechanical system. It has humidity controls and heating and cooling in it, so that you can change the humidity and change the temperature. This is the secret library. These are two views of it with the same chandelier in it. It's a chandelier that's a Art Deco Murano glass chandelier. It actually holds candles, and then because that doesn't seem very practical, we have a modern light fixture above it, high efficiency light, that shines on that. So that's where that is. And there's a rolling ladder that runs all the way around the inside of this. So this building, this particular room is made, essentially it's a rare book, sort of archival library here. These are the living spaces in it, the kitchen. Again, what we're doing is these are the original joists. We took the ceiling off and put floorboards above. The attic above is actually a semi-conditioned attic, so we insulated the attic as well and ran mechanical systems up there because we're trying to control humidity as well. And then the walls, we took the inside of the walls out, filled it with insulation, and then put it back in. The insulation in here is super tight. These are new windows to match the old windows due to their deterioration. One of the things about this kitchen is that our client grew up in Liverpool around World War II, and so this is a modern kitchen, but it has the soul of an old kitchen. It has a table in the middle, and the cabinets here, I think they're pieces of furniture. And that's actually this is actually pressed metal, like old Victorian ceilings, but it's used on the backs here, and it's actually, we use it outside as a wall as well. So I guess in conclusion, although we don't have to make it a conclusion, what we're trying to do is to do the right thing from an environmental standpoint by saving buildings, trying to make these buildings special and loved and functional and useful so they can live on for a long time. And in our practice, we will do buildings that are go for the sort of lead points and all those sorts of things. And we have done tax credit projects, but we never let those two things get in the way of the sort of, I guess, the bigger mission, which is to be kind to these buildings, reinvigorate them, make them loved, and do the right thing in the environment so that they stay going. So that was about as flimsy how to green your historic preservation project as you get, but that's the way we do these things. It really does come down to what you keep, what you take out, what you add. So I'm open for any questions since I torqued the whole discussion.
So if you save an old building from a green standpoint, it's better than.
Yeah.
I guess if you had unlimited resources, the only reason, I don't know. I mean, can you make an argument, economic argument for saving old buildings and making them green? I mean, is it ultimate, like, for the
It's funny because for the client, it's probably better in the bigger picture. The curious thing is the reason why LEED and all these sorts of things came up is that architects and owners and engineers and everybody just started calling all their projects green, and what they would do is the same old thing they did before, but they put cork on the floor or something like that, you know, or they list 9 things they did. Well, the biggest thing they did was build the building to start with. The greenest thing you can do is to maybe not build the building. Yeah. Okay, so like for a client that wants to green their building, there's probably not a really great economic argument. It's hard to do all these sorts of things. Unless the real estate makes it make sense. Basically, the cost per square foot isn't any less. In a lot of cases, it's more than starting from scratch. So it's almost easier to make the environmental argument for keeping the buildings than it is to make it from the economic or preservation side. You have to work those sorts of things. So in sort of a perverse way, what I'm talking about is that the best thing to do environmentally is to preserve these buildings, not to green your historic preservation project. That being said, what we try to do is that with a lot of these old buildings, new technology really does help them. Geothermal systems, and then sometimes high velocity mechanical systems can keep the duct sizes down. Lots of wireless things can keep the sort of packing of the building, because new buildings are built with all these interstitial spaces in order to hold all this stuff. I mean, old architects had this really great thing. All they had to do was build the edifice. If you got hot or cold or you had to go to the bathroom, you know, so what? You went outside, or it was hot or it was cold. Now the proportion of money in a building for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing is, you know, 40%. You know, I mean, it's pretty high. Where in the old days they just built. That's why they spent all their time on brickworks and cupolas, I think, is because they didn't have to do these other things. So we have to think about that. So when we're using this old building, it doesn't have any of these good spaces to stash this stuff in. So it gets hard. So the preserving buildings, I think, is almost the easiest environmental argument you can make. Then it's the hard work of trying to make all this stuff happen.
So it's interesting though, because there's no incentive, like economic incentive, that I know of, for actually saving a building. There are economic
only
incentives
like the
for
tax
using the right
credits,
kind of glass or using the right kind of floor or whatever, but not for actually deciding not to knock it down.
It's also worse than that, because there's no incentive to do anything well right now.
Right.
The real estate market is set up so that it's basically sort of reverse engineered for like sort of tract house construction. So they want you to have the cost per square foot as low as possible. They have no interest in replacement costs, maintenance costs, heating and cooling costs, utility bills, any of those things. None of those things are in the calculation. They're all ignored. So, so when you want to do a building better than one of those, you're already behind. And if you want to use an old building, it's a little worse. So one of the reasons that we take the approach we do is to change the conversation. Not because we do. I mean, you still have to work in the real world, but to really talk about why don't we make a really great building that people love, that you want to use, that inspires people, that's functional and all that. It solves some environmental issues. To do new buildings well, they still cost a lot of money. The costs are pretty similar in what we find. So that's how we kind of get to green a preservation project and have that make financial sense in sort of the appraisal world is very, very difficult. It's not impossible, but you're going against the appraisal world, against an old building that's grumpy and doesn't easily want to change, and then the environmental things. Although if you look at the right environmental things, you're in good shape. Like the building's already there, it's already connected to. If you go to LEED things, for instance, where you place a building is important. LEED is as what goes inside of it. So a lot of those things in their grading system already work to your advantage.
Have you succeeded in finding any common ground with the administrators or the people who administer the historic tax credit programs when you make dramatic changes in all the projects that you do to both the inside and sometimes even to the outside of the buildings? Have you had any success in expanding the horizon of their thinking to the larger picture the way you have presented it here?
What's happened, that's a really great question. What's happened is with all the budgetary problems and with the fact that this is in the state of Virginia specifically. In the state of Virginia, there was a gentleman who scammed the state tax credits and for a lot of money. So what's happened is the available funds and their sort of sense of humor and latitude has just been more and more constricted because they don't have a lot of money. So when you talk to Morale Calvian, who helps us on projects, or you talk directly to state people, they'll say that's a wonderful project, but it doesn't exactly, the tax credit part, they make a difference between doing a good job. Most of these projects here have actually won awards for historic preservation, historic architecture from Washington, D.C., those sorts of things. Mr. Chesson's project just won a national award, and we're going to San Francisco to get it next week.
He is.
Yes. We're going there for other reasons, too, for a symposium or whatever. But they make a distinction between what they want you to do. It's the Secretary of Interior standards, and I would argue pretty easily that all of these things fall within that in a tax credit project. So that's where you have to, that's where the lead, tax credits, monies, making things functional, all have their own little sort of things, and the administrators of these, whether it's lead is highly bureaucratic at this point. You have to basically hire a lead consultant to get a project through with lead just about. And for tax credits, it's all about lawyers and syndicating things and all those sorts of things. So, and given the economic recession of the last 7 years or whatever with the building things, with appraisals and those things going down, we just, in our work, have decided to look at it in sort of a different way, which is back to those first things of looking at commonalities and doing the right thing, and because our clients also don't want to spend the money on the bureaucratic endeavors of those sorts of things. Almost all of our clients, they want to do the right thing. I love old buildings, and I want to make it as green as possible. So that's where the market has taken us. That was a really long answer, but that was a really good question, too. You may want to rephrase it in case I didn't get the right parts of it. But it's tough. I mean, we're working right now on Glen Burnie on the Haus at the Museum of Shenandoah Valley. So everything the Americans with Disabilities Act plays against the historic resources folks. We have situations there where we have paneling that's very old, very old. They did it through paint analysis. However, other records show that the paneling is old, but it wasn't in that building. And then we have doorways to get people through with wheelchairs. And then we have, in that case, environmental issues because the building was never air conditioned, and it has wet feet. It literally sets at the head of a spring. So basically, the way we're functional is to really go back to what to add, what to keep, what to take out, and try to do the right thing with a series of judgments and negotiations. And that's how we can stay functional and do things. It's not, you can have somebody from Richmond come, and you can have a lead person come. We have lots of lead people in our office, and we've won lots of historical awards, but what we're doing is sort of all the above and none of the above. And it's the way that we think that we can get things done and do things interesting.
I would think the economics is very different too between the type of client that you have. If you have a client like an institution that's going to be staying with the building, then the initial costs are tame compared to what the
Well, in the
long-term
case of the
operating
Discovery
costs are.
Museum,
When you start to look at the long-term aspects of how a building's going to operate, how it's going to be healthier for the occupant.
oh yeah, corporations have a lot,
All of those
and the
things
government has a
factor in
much
also.
longer view
The
of this.
appraisers don't do that, but if the owner is willing to do that.
Yeah, there's a dislocation between what really makes sense, which is if you're gonna own this building for a long time, oh, how much does it cost to heat it and cool it, and when are things gonna break, versus the financial things, because in commercial properties, they reassess them every 5 years. I mean, your note's only good for 5 years. So there's a huge disincentive. The incentive is to do something really cheap and not ever think about long term. Government's different. Most governments are looking at LEED. A lot of them haven't, so you have to do it, and that's a different issue.